You're listening to episode 116 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness researchers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Researcher Chris Noone joins us to speak about his latest paper studying the effects of mindfulness on critical thinking and to talk about the need for active controls in mindfulness research. If you're listening to this podcast and find value and insights from what is shared here, know that this is made available from your generosity and the generosity of others like you. I want to thank those of you who are making monthly donations to keep this podcast going, and if you're not yet, please take a moment, go to presentmomentmindfulness.com and click on Make a Donation. One-time or especially monthly donations show you value this work, which can't happen without you. Thank you for your help, your support, and your kind generosity. As many of you long-time listeners know, I'm a big fan of good science and critical thinking, as well as mindfulness meditation, and was hopefully made clear in the paper Mind the Hype, a critical evaluation and prescriptive agenda for research on mindfulness and meditation. My co-authors who really did the heavy lifting in writing of that paper agree. There are good indications about how contemplative practice may be helpful in some ways for many people. It's not magic, and in science, the understanding of the natural world is never proven or case closed. There's always something to learn and improve how we meet new ideas and ways of being, and there's room for improvement within the scientific study of mindfulness. Good science also means looking at all the data, not just what you agree with or support the belief that you have. That's true for me too, and when I encountered the paper being discussed in today's episode, I was so very happy and grateful to the lead author's kind and companionable interest in speaking about it, especially in light of our different perspectives. I was impressed by the efforts made to do good science. Though I have some suggestions about how future research might address some of the potential gaps of this work, it's important that the limits of mindfulness be explored in an equitable manner too. So, again, great thanks to today's guest for his open and friendly engagement in today's talk. Chris Noone is a postdoctoral researcher with the Metal Research Group, which is led by Dr. Jerry Malloy. Chris recently completed a PhD at NUI Galway, focused on critically analyzing claims which have been made regarding the effects of mindfulness on thinking skills. Prior to this, Chris completed an MSc in Applied Neuroscience at Leiden University and a BA in Psychology at NUI Galway. He has contributed research on a wide range of topics broadly related to well-being, including the cognitive effects of mindfulness, citizen consultation for the design of well-being measures, financial stress in dairy farmers, and sexual counseling for patients in cardiac rehabilitation. Chris is chair of the Research and Policy Subcommittee of the National LGBT Federation. He has also contributed to the Yes Equality campaign, to the development of the first LGBT staff network at the National University of Ireland Galway, and is a member of the administration group for Bi Plus Ireland. He hopes to establish a research group focused on LGBT health and well-being in Ireland in the future. Our guest today is Chris Noone. Chris, thanks for being here. Nice to meet you.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
So let's just dive right in, having you tell us about your background.
Sure. So I'm from the west of Ireland, a small town called Ennis. So people on your side of the Atlantic might be familiar with Shannon Airport, which is nearby. But I originally studied psychology as my undergraduate, and then I did a master's in a long-winded title. It was called Applied Neuroscience in Education and Child Studies. So it was basically about applying findings from educational psychology and also neuroscience within the classroom. And I suppose that studying that master's made me think about the kind of assumptions that are made about how we improve cognitive ability. And it was around the 2012, 2013 academic year that I was doing that master's, and mindfulness was starting to hit the media big time. Obviously, had been about a decade of psychology research happening, like serious psychology research happening, and it was just starting to hit the media mainstream. So I became interested in it, and I started trying it out myself, and then I started kind of checking out the evidence behind it. And I suppose the trigger for my line of research was when I was reading what was a report into the application of meditation practices, of mindfulness meditation practices, into higher education by Shauna Shapiro, who's, you probably know very well. Kirk Warren Brown was on that report as well, the author of the Mindfulness Attention Awareness Skill. And they made reference in that report to the fact that mindfulness meditation would probably increase critical thinking.
Probably.
Yeah. And I just, they gave a little bit of context as to why it might do that, but not a whole lot. And I was trying to figure out why that might be. Why would it be that mindfulness might increase critical thinking? Because I was familiar with research on critical thinking and how hard it is to increase critical thinking. And critical thinking is such an important skill in society. I mean, you only need to look at all the things that happen as a result of low levels of critical thinking. Yeah. Climate change denial, the use of medicines that don't have any evidence behind them, and you could go on. And there's also a lot of evidence that a lack of critical thinking is behind many of the kind of political failures that have happened throughout the years. So it's people who are more kind of have high IQ and high social skills that succeed in politics, but not necessarily those with high critical thinking skills. There's a guy called Keith Stanovic who's done a very interesting program of work on that, and written a book called What Intelligence Tests Miss, where he argues for the value of critical thinking over intelligence. And
yeah, one of the first interviews I ever did for a different podcast was with Dr. Linda Elder, who wrote one of the books on critical thinking.
Great.
And it was, there's such an important need to keep an open mind, but not so open your brains fall out. And
that's it, yeah.
That you're able to really, as best you can, see things as they really are and make appropriate discernment in how your thinking might be around what you're seeing. So yeah, totally with you on the value and importance of critical thinking, especially these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And it happened that that one of the lectures I had during my undergraduate program here in Galway, Dr. Michael Hogan had done a lot of research on ways of changing instruction in universities so that critical thinking was enhanced, but had also held an interest in mindfulness research also. So I began to kind of talk to him about this connection and whether it existed. We were also kind of interested in the role of emotion and mood and critical thinking, because there was a lot of work coming out of the field of positive psychology that was making claims about, oh, you need to be in a positive mood to do your most effective thinking. And we were a little bit skeptical about that. So I started a PhD under the supervision of Dr. Michael Hogan, and we started to see that actually, there's a lot of evidence suggesting that being in a negative mood is better for critical thinking, because it narrows your focus to be very problem oriented, which is actually the kind of mindset you need to be in to face a challenge, to face a problem and try and solve it. You're not so disposed to think critically through a problem if you're in a positive mood, because you think everything's fine. And we started looking further into the processes that might be underlying this kind of these relationships. And there's a lot of evidence showing that that negative affect, negative mood triggers self-regulation. So it's triggering the self-regulatory process where you actually slow down and think through the problem. And so I started to kind of connect the dots to mindfulness there. And there's a lot of research that connects mindfulness to self-regulation. Obviously, during a mindfulness meditation practice, you are constantly self-regulating your attention. Every time it drifts away, you need to notice that it's drifted away. You need to then shift your attention back to the present moment, whatever you're focusing on in the present moment. So that's classic self-regulation right there. It's conflict monitoring. Your goal is to be focused on the present moment. Then your attention drifts away. You notice that conflict between your goal and situation and your current situation, and then you exert self-regulation to rectify and bring your current state in line with your goal state. So that really kind of brought the framework of our research together, that maybe mindfulness helps you exert self-regulation, and that helps you slow down and think more critically. And we were able to connect it to kind of dual processing frameworks then, the thinking fast and slow, as Danny Kahneman would say. So yeah, that was kind of the path from thinking about, how does cognitive psychology research get applied in the classroom, to seeing these claims about mindfulness and critical thinking, and then thinking through the cognitive psychology underlying all that, and then starting a program of research to evaluate these claims.
All right, so let's take a look at the research. This particular study, and you've done a couple. We're talking about this most recent one. And for those listening again, I'll have a link to the study we're talking about on the episode page for this episode. So please do take a look at that yourself. Chris, what made you decide to do this particular study? Talking about exploring, all right, mindfulness and critical thinking. What's there?
Yeah, so it was kind of the third in a series of studies that we had done. We started with establishing whether there was just, using a cross-sectional design, just whether there was a correlational link at all. I mean, if there wasn't, then that was kind of, there's no point following up on this stuff. So
yeah, game over.
yeah. So but we did that it was a bit more sophisticated than just a correlational study, because we had our measures of self-regulation or executive functioning, the sub-processes of self-regulation, and we took a structural equation modeling approach to model the relationships between kind of what we saw as the two key facets of mindfulness, so the paying attention in the present moment and the non-reactivity. And we had a model that involved both of those, kind of the three, considered the three most basic processes of executive functioning or self-regulation: updating, inhibition, and shifting, and then critical thinking as the outcome. And what we found in that study was small but significant effects that were showing that the two facets of mindfulness did have significant indirect effects on critical thinking, and these indirect effects were going through inhibition. So it was they were being mediated by inhibition, and this was really supporting our initial idea that I was explaining about the link between mindfulness and then self-regulation and then critical thinking, because and it was really linking in beautifully to these dual processing theories, because the idea of dual processing theories is that we have these automatic set of cognitive processes that will happen anyway. When we have a stimulus, and then an automatic response will happen anyway, no matter what. In order to get to the point of these type 2 processes, the more deliberative or reflective processes, we need to be able to inhibit the type 1 response. So it'll be there, but we need to stop it before we actually kind of verbalize it, and allow ourselves the time to engage these more deliberative processes. So the fact that inhibition, or out of the kind of 3 different processes, updating being about kind of revising the information in your working memory, shifting about being able to move between different pieces of information in your working memory, and then inhibition being about being able to stop a prepotent response, it made sense that inhibition would be the one that emerged as the mediator. Now, what was interesting was we also saw a significant negative effect between non-reactivity and critical thinking. So this was also interesting, and also something that we had kind of predicted, because we had noticed that there is a tension between this theory that mindfulness could facilitate critical thinking, and also the fact that in the way that mindfulness has been translated into the Western context, it's taken on this this language around acceptance, and there hasn't been a lot of research into how people actually interpret that language around acceptance that's used. And if it's actually interpreted quite broadly, it could be that people are understanding that they should accept everything
right
around them, and which
I've seen that. I will go out on a limb and call it dangerous misinterpretation of what is intended by the idea of acceptance.
Yes.
It's not so much I'm in say an abusive relationship, I should just accept it and take my beating. It's not that.
Yeah.
Acceptance in a more ethically responsible way for participants' well-being is that this is seeing things how they are. Acknowledging that, no, I'm in an abusive relationship. That's the acceptance part.
Yeah, and if you're applying it to even just, general information that's challenging to you, right? Often information that challenges or preconceptions, it does give us a slightly aversive feeling when we encounter it, and it's very easy to kind of wipe it off by saying, "Oh, I'm just accepting that information exists," rather than actually kind of processing and reflecting on the information.
Right.
And so we were kind of thinking, "Oh, does this mean?" And obviously, accepting information without question is the exact opposite of critical thinking.
Exactly, and I would suggest the opposite of mindfulness.
Well, yeah, and I think it is worth further study being done into that,
Mm-hmm.
how people understand that component of mindfulness teaching. So that was our kind of cross-sectional findings. We wanted to follow that up experimentally. We did that in a lab using kind of 2 10-minute mindfulness meditations. Well, one was mindfulness meditation, the other was a Sham meditation very much sounded like you were meditating. It was adapted from some work by Fadel Zaidan.
Yeah, good friend. Yeah.
Yeah, and in his work, he demonstrated that it was a feasible approach, and that people genuinely thought that they were meditating. And we got some of his recordings, and then we did re-record them. I got my brother to record them. He's a therapist here in Ireland, so I thought the Irish accent would be a little more feasible to use. And
cultural sensitivity, good for you.
Exactly, yeah. So the feedback we got was that people genuinely thought they were meditating, and it's interesting. Over on average, we found absolutely no difference between both of them. They did a set of critical thinking questions before they meditated, or Sham meditated. They did a set of questions after they meditated, and they weren't the same ones. They were kind of randomized, and the order was counterbalanced. And yeah, so we saw no benefit of mindfulness meditation in that situation, and this kind of this was very interesting to me, because there's a lot of claims being made by mindfulness consultants about like desktop mindfulness in business settings. That if you're struggling with a business decision, you do your 10-minute mindfulness right there, and I guarantee you'll make a better decision after it.
Anytime someone says science is proven or it's guaranteed, that's when my red flags go up.
Yeah, exactly. So we did, on average, we didn't find any benefit. But interestingly, when we looked at some moderation analysis, and I guess caution interpretation into these, it's always, we would have needed a larger sample size really to have to be completely confident about the effects here, but it's worth exploring in further studies. What we did find was people who were lower on two types of thinking disposition. These thinking dispositions are kind of your different types of motivation towards critical thinking, towards reflective thinking. And the two motivations we looked at was one, probably maybe you're familiar with, is called need for cognition, and that's generally it's kind of a dispositional motivation towards putting in a lot of cognitive effort. Mm-hmm. So people are high on that, are the kind of people that love puzzles, love solving problems, love thinking through things. People who are low on that are the kind of people that will literally just say, "Oh, I'll just take that one," because they didn't want to actually think about what they really wanted,
Yeah.
Then the other thinking disposition was actively open-minded thinking. So that's, again, the people who are high in that will, they are able to tolerate ideas that are counter to their own, and they will think through what those ideas really mean. People who are low on that would be much more rigid and wouldn't actually wouldn't even consider thinking about something that isn't in line with their own beliefs. So obviously, being high in both of them would be the ideal condition for critical thinking. And what we found was the group of people that benefited from the mindfulness meditation were the people who were low on each of these thinking dispositions. So, it needs to be followed up. I wouldn't. I don't want anyone going off, selling selling 10-minute mindfulness meditations to people low in these two dispositions based on my one study. But it does link in interestingly to the idea of kind of overriding habits. These are habits of thought. There's some literature linking mindfulness to making it easier to break habits. It makes sense from the dual process point of view as well, that habits are generally your automatic approach to your environment.
And we're actively pushing against automaticity in mindfulness practice.
Exactly. So if it makes sense, if everybody else besides those people were actually able to inhibit their automatic responses anyway, then they didn't really need the mindfulness meditation, or it didn't have a large impact. But for the
You're
small
already
group,
there.
yeah, for the small group of people that are in that kind of zone where automaticity needs to be inhibited,
Mhm.
then the mindfulness meditation happened to help them.
Yeah, Chris, it's interesting hearing you talk about those two different factors of thinking. That one of the very common misperceptions I run into a lot as a teacher is that people come into a mindfulness program, and I see in applications and conversations with folks that they want to quiet their mind. There's this
Mhm.
impression that thinking is something that I'm going to learn how to stop doing,
Oh yeah, yeah,
instead of, first let's just become aware of what's there in thinking, and that
yeah.
let's not add on the stress of trying to stop thinking, because that you got a brain. What's going to happen? And in a program like this, where you're not on a very rarefied environment of retreats, probably thinking is going to continue. And what do you do with it?
Yeah.
That's what I think is maybe a bit more realistic and valuable to people as they learn the practice.
I suppose it's important to note that we hypothesize the complete opposite relationship.
Really?
We considered mindfulness meditation to be a cognitively effortful activity. So we assumed that people who were more who just preferred those kinds of activities would benefit from it more,
Uh-huh.
because I guess we assumed that they'd engage with it more. And similarly with the actively open-minded thinking, we assumed that people who were more disposed towards open-minded thinking would engage more with something like mindfulness. Because I mean, actually it was a condition of the participant recruitment that none of them had participated in mindfulness retreats or interventions or anything like that before. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a uh, different kind of, I'll say, attentional load rather than cognitive load. Rather
Okay.
than it being active thinking, you are working very strongly and exercising your brain in attention, but maybe not so much in thinking. You're doing the shifting that you were describing with
Mm.
thinking skills. That I'm like noticing, I'm thinking about my breathing, and then doing the shifting to attending to the experience. Well, that takes some intention. There's some work there. There's some load there that's happening. So it's completely understandable to see why that might be something you would think, oh, we
Mm.
should see this, but we're seeing something different.
Yeah. So yeah, it was very interesting results, but it did show that we were, yeah, I guess um that I guess we didn't consider that those thinking dispositions would actually kind of interact more with the actual cognitive process of how mindfulness is related to kind of self-regulation. And we thought it was kind of more about the initial engagement with the whole process.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was interesting to see that even though the results were different to what we predicted, they still kind of lined up with the framework that we were thinking about.
Yeah.
um at the same time, yeah, so this moves us on to the actual study that you asked me to talk about. I just thought I'd lay the foundation. And we we felt the need to really follow this up with, a more accurate test of what really happens when people start to engage in mindfulness meditation. So it's not enough to really test the effects of one session of mindfulness, though it's a widely used procedure in mindfulness research, and very nice in terms of the experimental control that it allows you to have. Um, the ecological validity of it, the extent to which it matches up with what goes on in the real world, is questionable.
Right.
So
Right.
so we started thinking about, well, how can we actually get at an ecologically valid test of mindfulness meditation? So we knew that it would have to be something regular. It wasn't enough for it just to be once off.
Yeah.
Um, we knew that it would need to involve guided instruction. We couldn't give people a book or anything like that to try and learn it themselves. Though I know people do try and learn it that way, but we were talking about um, a group of people that didn't have any experience in this at all. So we thought, they definitely need some guided instruction. And from there, we were also kind of thinking about, well, in terms of resources, I'm doing this as part of my PhD. I do want to kind of run some sort of randomized controlled trial in terms of design, but in terms of actual infrastructure, I don't have the funding to set something like that up with the resources that were at my disposal. So so I started thinking a little bit about how how could I get intervention material without having to pay a mindfulness teacher.
Yeah.
And also I was very aware that how much time does a mindfulness teacher have to participate in a study like this? How much motivation do they have to participate in a study like this? I mean, if you're a mindfulness teacher already, I think a lot of the time you know enough about about mindfulness that you don't need. I mean, I met a lot of mindfulness teachers that weren't particularly interested in the idea of research about mindfulness.
Right.
Which I'm not saying that characterizes mindfulness teachers in general, but certainly in the area that was my kind of catchment, that was the feeling I got. So I needed something different, and I came across. I'd used Headspace myself, but I came across the fact that they had this kind of Teams infrastructure that was supposed to be for organizations to be able to roll out like mindfulness to all their employees, and then kind of be able to keep track of who was using it and stuff like that. And for me, I was just like, that's perfect for doing research, to be able to roll out free subscriptions to Headspace to a bunch of participants, be able to track their adherence to the intervention program, and then ideally have some sort of control over what a control condition would involve. Because I was really keen that we not use a weightless control. So the reason I was keen to not use a weightless control was because I noticed that was used a lot in mindfulness research, and that where it wasn't used, that effects were more modest. And that makes perfect sense, because obviously when you use a weightless control, I don't think people can talk about this enough, because it's something that we use out of convenience a lot in psychology and other types of research. But we have to be honest and say that when you're comparing an intervention to weightless control, you're effectively comparing something to nothing.
Right.
And you can't isolate what's the something is. You've turned the something into a black box then, because you don't know what in that something is causing the effect.
Right.
Is it just the mere fact that they're getting attention? Is it placebo? Is it, if there's several components to the intervention, which component is driving the effect most? So we identified that in mindfulness meditation, there's a few things going on. There's just the mere attention, that there's the sitting down and giving yourself a break in the middle of the day. There's the physiological relaxation that happens. And then there's the specific effortful attentional control. And all of our kind of previous studies were relying on the self-regulation of attention as the kind of main driver of the effects that we were hypothesizing about. So we wanted a control group that wasn't just comparing all of these things, the relaxation, the sitting down, the having your eyes closed, the plus the attention to nothing, because then we wouldn't be able to attribute, we wouldn't be testing. The important thing is, I mean, to be really clear, is we wouldn't then be testing our research question.
Right.
Our research question would be, do these four things together increase critical thinking when compared to nothing?
Right.
What we wanted to know was, does the kind of self-regulation of attention involved in mindfulness increase critical thinking?
I think about eating two different kinds of pizza. You get a pizza with everything on it and a pizza with everything on it except onions. Okay, that's a little more valid versus pizza with everything on it and you go hungry.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, I'm going to say the pizza is a lot more satisfying than going hungry.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's a great example. So, yeah, we worked with Headspace to develop an active control condition. We had a few different options, but we settled on the script by Fadel Zaidan, which we had come across before, and we were fortunate enough that Headspace managed to pin down Andy Puddicombe, the voice of Headspace,
yep.
and get him to record the script for us, and then they were so helpful because they also allowed us to set up the study in a double-blind fashion. So the way that worked was there were codes generated which were entered into the app, and that determined which content you got, whether you got this active control. And the active control consisted of what I call a sham meditation, is also the term that Zaidan used for it. So basically, it includes all these elements: the sitting down, the having your eyes closed, and thinking. Importantly, I didn't mention it when I was talking about the control group a second ago, expectancy effects. Mm-hmm. So, there's a lot of, mindfulness is out there in the mainstream now. People have expectations about what it does.
And that confirmation bias can just skew everything.
Absolutely. So you need to control for that as well. So we told everybody, you're all getting mindfulness meditation. And just in case they were talking to each other and they thought, oh, my one sounds a little bit different, we just said they're two slightly different types of mindfulness meditation, but they both work exactly the same. They both expect to have the same effects. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that allowed us to. So the sham meditation sounded like, okay, it was Andy Puddicombe saying, hello, welcome to Headspace. I can't do the accent, but yeah, let's close your eyes. Let's sit here in meditation. Just let your thoughts go by, as they would at any time, but not giving any specific instructions on what to do when their thoughts were wandering. When their mind was wandering. No instructions on how to anchor your attention at all. Yeah, so these codes, going back to the double blinding, these codes gave access to either that condition or the mindfulness meditation condition, which is just the regular Headspace meditations. And when the codes were sent to us, the researchers, they were just labeled Group A and Group B by Headspace. We didn't know which was which. Mm-hmm. And we randomized our participants to Group A or Group B. We ran through the whole study. We ran the statistical analysis, and then we found out which was Group A and which was Group B once the analysis was done. So we were double blinded the whole way. If there was any reason to, if there was any distress in a participant, we had the ability to for that individual participant, find out which condition they were in. But there was no distress caused during the trial. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the other element that the app allowed for, which is not often seen in mindfulness research, was the objective data regarding adherence.
Mm-hmm.
So we were able to see when people logged in and sat through a meditation, whereas most studies would rely on self-report data.
Yeah.
So, which is, a lot of problems associated with that.
Yes, lots. Sure, I did the meditation.
Yeah, I'm not gonna. Yeah. So yeah, well, I guess what we found. Well, first of all, we had these kind of process measures, which were just to see, because we were concerned that this might not be a plausible thing to do to expect that participants would believe us that this sham meditation was really a meditation, but the measures we used in terms of acceptability and enjoyment and quality, as far as they could perceive quality of meditation, there was no significant differences in any of those. And then for the primary outcome measures of mindfulness, it's dispositional mindfulness you would expect to see increasing after regular mindfulness practice. We didn't see that. We saw an improvement, but it was for both groups to the exact same extent, which indicates to us some problems with the measurement of mindfulness in that fashion. Mm-hmm. We saw increases in critical thinking. Also, again, there were small effects, not different between the two groups, probably just attributable to just getting slightly better over a university semester. So that's good to see. But also the fact that they were actually answering the same questions as at the baseline, so they probably just got a little bit better.
There's a little more familiarity with it. That's one of the things that happens in any kind of study where you're using the same instrument. I've been through this before. There's no chatter around what do I do here? Now I know, and so performance is expected to go up a little bit.
Yeah. So and then we also had an executive function measure, which we didn't see any improvement in. So yeah, I mean, overall, what it says to us is, I wouldn't say that it's a study that should interrupt the research on mindfulness at all, or the practice of mindfulness. I think it should temper certain claims about the cognitive benefits of mindfulness, because there isn't enough research to back up claims that mindfulness improves higher order cognition. I think the research on the basic science of mindfulness around attention and perception is pretty strong, but these more higher order types of cognition, like critical thinking, problem solving, decision making, we've seen some studies come out on that, but it's only a handful. And actually, I'm quite skeptical of the results of those studies because of the poor methodologies that have been used in those. And I think we really provided an advance in terms of the rigor that you can apply in these types of studies, and that did show a significant reduction in the effect size for some of these effects. We also looked at well-being, just in order to not that it was a focal point of interest, but in order to compare our study to previous studies that have been done using mindfulness and other meditation apps that had found effects. And we used the same measure that of well-being that had been used in some of those studies, and we didn't see any increase in well-being. So I think the jury is still out on mindfulness meditation apps, the effects of them. I think there's a lot more research needs to be done on traditional mindfulness as well. It certainly does. It certainly has some effect, but I'm not sure we're able to capture it in the way that we do mindfulness research right now. And I think there's also, in some of my conversations since this paper has come out, there's been people asking, well, why aren't we doing research comparing the use of an app versus the use of an instructor. And I think that might be an interesting thing to do as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And of course, as listeners of the podcast know, I do online training and some app-based stuff as well. So yeah, I think that would be a very interesting thing to take a look at, because the effects of just being live with another person, whether it's physically in person or even on screen as you and I are now, there's a back and forth, which itself, my suggestion and in my experience, I don't expect there be a great deal of variance in the results of the effects we might see from a mindfulness program between online live. So there is interaction with other participants and teacher, and so you have some of those social aspects, and an in-person intervention of the same amount of duration, the time that you meet each week and all of that. I expect there's not going to be a great deal of difference between those. I could be wrong. But more work to be done on this. One thing I did want to put a spotlight on, Chris, in a good way, is some of the really good strengths that you had with this study. The fidelity to the intervention that people got 100%, because this is recorded, because you had everyone getting the same stuff.
Yeah.
What are some of the other strengths and maybe some of the limits of the study that you, I think, did a very nice job in noting on the study?
Sure. So, I mean, just to pick up on that point around fidelity first, I think it's something that we do need to think about a lot more in mindfulness research. And I work in the area of kind of health behavior change at the moment, and in that field, fidelity and feasibility and acceptance are all major parts of the intervention development process. And I think mindfulness research jumped a few steps, basically. It went from some basic science involving, the effects on attention and some neuroscientific stuff, straight to application. And there's not so much work in the middle on how do we construct these interventions in a way that's feasible to the target population,
right?
For the target population, or acceptable to the target population rather, and feasible in the settings that we want to implement it in. Demonstrated this very nicely with a research paper he and one of his colleagues, whose name is escaping me at the moment, where they map they map mindfulness research to different points on the NIH kind of research cycle, and they show that there is this big gap in the middle that needs to be addressed. So I think, in terms of fidelity, it's not so much something that we just switch to apps and it's solved because it's 100% straight away.
Right.
We can do work to increase fidelity and study fidelity, and also study adherence. Adherence to interventions is a huge area of study outside of the realm of mindfulness, and there's a lot of insights from that research that could be brought into mindfulness about why do certain people engage with it and why not, and how do we increase engagement, and so on.
You'd even mentioned that in there, that you had people who were completing at least half of the sessions, and that there was a percentage of those, and of course that also means there's a percentage that didn't complete more than half, and of course that's an ongoing challenge, that unless you unethically have people locked down and force them to do the intervention, there's going to be the challenge of knowing, and at least using things like technology can help sometimes with showing, at least we know this particular recording was played during this time by this individual. We don't know
Yeah.
if they were even in the room for it, but we do know that at the very least there's that much. So it's I think, a step forward than just self-report.
Absolutely. So there's that kind of that. I think that's a whole area that needs to be looked at, and I think talking to people in health psychology and implementation science would go a long way towards addressing that issue, because that's kind of their bread and butter. But other strengths of the study, well, I mean, I've already mentioned the kind of the double blinding, the active control, the objective adherence. I think I think one of the most significant strengths was that it was also pre-registered. I think pre-registration is something all psychologists should be getting involved with. We should be noting our hypotheses in public before we actually carry out studies and analyze the data, because it's the only way that we can provide evidence that there was no kind of p-hacking involved,
Exactly.
and we all know the kind of issues that on replicability and the discourse on questionable research practices that's been going on in psychology in the last few years. And so I was very intent on using what I've learned from the voices that have been active in talking about how we can do things better. So
yeah, I think it may be useful to note for those who may not be as familiar with what we're talking about, the idea of we declare up front, here's what we're looking for, here's what our expectations may be. And that's quite a contrast. I think you're absolutely right on this, from I just do a study and then what the results are, I say, yeah, that's what I was looking for right there.
Yeah.
That's not valid. Or stopping the study as soon as you get the results that you want, instead of continuing for the full declared duration of it. So thank you for doing that.
Well, I was delighted to be able to do it, and it, because basically the previous two studies that I described that were part of this overall project were quite exploratory, or at least the most interesting findings within them were exploratory. So I was kind of keen to follow up those findings in a confirmatory fashion. And the only way of really confirming hypotheses is to declare them in advance, openly. So yeah, in terms of the
limits, in
terms of weaknesses, well, I mean, one crucial thing to note about the difference between the experimental and the active control condition was that there was a kind of progressive nature to the mindfulness group's content, because they were hearing something new from Headspace every day and gradually learning more and more skills. Whereas the active control group, we're actually just hearing the same recording every day. Ideally we would have somehow managed to squeeze 20 fake meditations out of Andy Puddicombe, but we were just glad to even get one out of him. So so that's an interesting difference, and it also kind of slightly undermines the attempt to only have there be one key difference between the two conditions, because we also now have this difference of variability in the content.
It's a very different experience when you have a different meditation over the course of time versus listening to the same thing. Now, in some ways, there's a benefit of, I really get familiar with this, and I can really embed myself in whatever this particular one thing is. And that's a very different experience from, and now I'm learning something else. So it is. I think about it of, again, this analogy of maybe exercising, that if you're just doing curls, it may help your bicep and your legs aren't getting any exercise. But if you have some variability, there are going to be a different set of effects that one might see. So, yeah.
There's also, I mean, another weakness is, it's conceivable that the headspace intervention doesn't increase mindfulness. That it's not a genuine mindfulness meditation experience. And I, I'm I've having used it, I think it is. Um, but again, perhaps there's room for more of that development work I was talking about in trying to assess whether this is a feasible intervention for increasing mindfulness first before we start talking about efficacy.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously, if this doesn't raise mindfulness, then it doesn't allow us to test the effects of mindfulness.
Yeah, then it's sham versus sham.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's another kind of issue that it's hard to reason our way out of. And yeah, I think we could have possibly included stronger tests of executive functioning as well. I mean, it's possible that we missed an effect there because the effect that the task that we used wasn't focused on inhibition, which was the effect we saw in the first study. And to be honest, that was just a matter of convenience in terms of the task that we could program to use in the group setting that we were testing people in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, ideally we would check that again with a task that's more squarely focused on inhibition.
Yeah.
Um,
Two other things I would mention, and you do mention this, and you did, I think, a really nice job of disclosure in the paper itself. Is, of course, there's an incentive to participate in the program that may have had its own influence, and of course that is so with these studies. Students need something,
exactly.
and that, of course, can always have an influence. And another is the possibility, along with the limits of the measures, that they themselves may have some problems with them, that there may be strong similarities between the real, quote unquote, real meditation and the sham meditation. And having looked at both of those and being fortunately very familiar with Fadil Zidan's work, as he's been a guest here before, he's a really very good researcher. His work on pain is just something to take a look at. He's done some really interesting things with that and made some interesting discoveries. Is that there is some overlap. If you have a Venn diagram of the sham and the real, that there's going to be a big overlap because it simply in the sham, and having seen the script, that it does involve breathing. And that there is this guidance that, along by this same person, Andy Puttycombe, who does the voice for Headspace and that app, that there may be some overlap with that, of the continued guidance to just breathe deeply, and what's that like, and if people are doing that, is there something else they can attend to, or is the attention naturally going to be drawn to the breath? So and this is one of the ongoing challenges that are always going to exist with coming up with some kind of active control. Is it reading a shopping list, listening to a shopping list, so someone reading that, or some other kind of thing? What again? What's the active ingredient? What are the onions on that pizza? And how do we make that a clearly distinct, measurable thing? So an ongoing challenge. And again, great thanks and credit to you for including that information in the study itself.
I think another interesting point that relates to the similarity between actually connects both of your points there, the point about measurement and the point about the similarity between the two groups, or the content delivered to the two groups, is that in these self-report measures of mindfulness, which I'm skeptical about the use of now, the literal words used in the items,
right,
are the words used in the guided meditation. You hear a lot of the same words and even some in the in the Sham meditation. So there's
It's a bit leading.
yeah, exactly. So I'm like I'm suggest I don't know, I don't think I said it in the paper itself, but in my in the PhD thesis that I wrote connecting the three papers, one of the things I discuss is are we just measuring perceived mindfulness?
Right. Right.
Are we just measuring how mindful people think
Think
they
they're
are?
mine. Right.
And that's really all when you think about it, you're like, actually, yeah, that's all we can measure with a self-report anyway.
Right. Exactly. And that's an
And
ongoing challenge with self-report, not just in mindfulness. And
yeah,
that's
but there's the added complexity with mindfulness of self-reporting on your own awareness. So being aware enough to, and you see some weird results pop up where there's been a couple of studies where people with a lot of meditation experience reported lower levels of mindfulness than people with none, um, because maybe they actually have enough awareness to be aware of how of their lack of
right.
of
Right.
mindfulness.
Yeah, absolutely. And other
Yeah.
effects that I have seen and it's fairly consistent. Folks who might not do as well on, say, the FFM, the five facet mindfulness questionnaire that you used. And
Yeah.
full disclosure for the listeners, I don't think will be surprised. I use this in my own MBSR programming because there isn't a lot that has some distinguishing characteristics in it. Understanding it's not perfect and there are flaws with it and challenges, of course, in self-report. That there's, Chris, as you're saying, there maybe the people with a lot of experience are simply more aware of how unaware they are. Absolutely. And in addition to that, I would say that for some folks coming in with lots of meditation experience, I've also noted sometimes don't do so well, that there's a decline in how they're reflected in the FFMQ. I think because there's a switching that they have been honest about and saying, what I'm running into is I'm used to doing things this way. And in class, this intervention does it a little bit differently. And so there was this, some of their attentional load was in the shift itself. And that may also be accounting for some of the performance degradation that we might be seeing there.
So, I mean, I think we certainly need to start moving towards objective measurement where possible. I'm not the first to suggest that, and there is development work happening there. I think also in all of the attention research, I'm not sure we're capturing something after mindfulness. I think we're just capturing parts of mindfulness there. So it might be fair enough to say that some of those attention tasks could be used as proxies of mindfulness. The couple of objective measures I've come across are, there's one by Richie Davidson's team, which involves breath counting, and there's also one by I think Paul Fruin, which is similar, but it's a kind of a breath awareness task. So being aware of how many, you need to be able to report on how many breaths you took as well. It's kind of similar, but measured in a slightly different way. I think they're both interesting because they get at the awareness component of mindfulness, but they don't quite get at that kind of non-reactive aspect of mindfulness. So one idea I've had, and I haven't done anything about it, would be if you inserted a startle into those tasks. And I guess you'd expect the people who have developed this non-reactive skill to be less perturbed by the startle and be able to be more accurate then in their report of how many breaths they took than people who weren't weren't as able to deal with the startle. So it's just an idea. I don't know.
Interesting idea. It's so fascinating. This is something that is, as someone who, at least for the time being, is interested in mindfulness research and some aspect of it, and this particular context with critical thinking, you'll never be bored.
Yeah,
There'll always be
exactly.
something new that you can do and any way you can improve. And really that's what I find very fascinating about this and very um, positive about this is that there is that opportunity to improve, to make things better. And that's one of the tremendous values I see in the scientific method is, okay, how do we control for this a little bit better than we did last time? What did we learn from this? And how can that inform what we do to maybe see things as they really are?
Yeah.
Chris, anything else you want to share with the listeners?
I think I would just encourage listeners to think about mindfulness in a more fine-grained way. I think that like there's been a tendency to see mindfulness as a panacea, so that it can help all people in all situations, and that's just
Not
not
so.
not so and not possible. And we chatted a little about this before that we started recording, about how there are some individuals for who it works really well, there's some for whom it doesn't work at all, and there's some for whom it even is actually a harmful approach. And there are only going to be so many areas in which it can actually be of use. And I think we need to direct our resources towards developing the parts of the evidence base where there's a little bit already, but where but that we need to build upon, find what results are replicable, do these studies in large enough sample sizes so that we can look at the moderation effects, which will tell us, okay, it's working for this type of person, but not this type of person. And then be able to use those kind of basic findings to implement and develop an intervention that's feasible, that's acceptable to the types of people we want to target. So I do think we need to slow down. Maybe we need to be more mindful about our approach to
Mindful
mindfulness.
pause. Might be helpful.
So I do think the research needs to slow down and be more careful. Yeah.
Great. Our guest today, Chris Noone. The paper that we're talking about is linked on the episode page for this episode, so be sure to check that out and read through the paper. It really is interesting reading. Chris, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate your time today.
Thanks very much. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.